Well, I think many commentators have astutely observed that this is partly a function of a lack of scientific formation in the general public, that the general public is not well aware of many basic issues in science. They don't have a sense of what really is involved in experimental science, so they will encounter claims on the internet and they will have a certain gullibility in the face of those claims. I think when it comes to issues like healthcare and treatment of, for example, a serious ailment, maybe cancer, there are, many claims on the internet about how to treat cancer that are little more than snake oil. They are not scientifically based. They are not based on placebo, double-blind types of studies. They make claims that are quite preposterous sometimes, and sometimes also the drive behind that is an economic one to make money. And so I think people do struggle to have a sense of what represents an authoritative source of information for them when they go onto the internet, which is such a vast sea of information, and they're not sure what the criteria really should be. But I do think a solid formation in science serves to a significant degree in helping people to eliminate or to separate the wheat from the chaff.
Do television shows like ABC Bones, about a forensic anthropologist, forensic scientist, or what's the other one? Numbers is the other one, with advanced mathematics, or CSI with your on-the-spot investigations. Are shows of this sort actually helping, or are they hurting? Are they conveying real education, or is it just Hollywood?
Well, I don't know for sure. I have only watched one or two of those, over the past few years, and probably didn't watch the whole of the show. My sense is that the way that science is portrayed on there, with the ability to kind of rapidly get answers, sometimes without, having to acknowledge the length of time that's involved in carrying out certain bioassays, that it's rather unrealistic in the way that it's portrayed. And I think, maybe a show like that can generate an initial wave of interest or enthusiasm when it comes to getting people interested in science, and that could be seen as good. But I think you have to have an authentic formation. You have to study science to be able to really, derive greater benefits. I don't think a show like that is able to be much more than entertainment.
Oh, rats! I can't get my degree after watching TV.
Well, I don't think so. I haven't heard of any possibility like that yet.
Oh, dread.
Well, one study looked at the proportion of people who are resuscitated when crash carts are called in hospital shows, and it's the vast majority of people who are brought back to life with those, cardiopulmonary resuscitation and electrical stimulation. And in reality, it's actually only a fraction of people, and those who do survive have, crushed chests and broken ribs and terrible bruises and so forth. So, I think that it often does a great disservice to our understanding of medicine and science, the way that they're portrayed on television.
I'll never watch Grey's Anatomy in the same way again. Something I want to ask you, I want to start with you on this one, Dr. Hughes, something Professor Somerville said a moment ago about areas of technology that perhaps we should not enter into. Many people do believe that there are areas of knowledge that should simply be beyond the purview of men. Some places we just shouldn't go, even if we can. Do you believe there should be limits on how far we go in the use of biotechnology? Should there be areas of potential knowledge that we just avoid because we do not possess the wisdom to even explore them?
Well, my starting point with those questions is with individual liberty, in that I think that people have a right to control their own brains, their own body, and their own reproduction. And then when government steps into those domains, it should be for a very good public policy reason. It should be because there's tangible evidence that the technology that someone wants to use is dangerous to themselves or others. And so we have Food and Drug Administration, we have clinical testing regimes to determine the safety of drugs and devices. And I think that those are generally adequate to the task of determining whether they should be approved. I think they've been undermined frequently by corporate interference and other kinds of political machinations, but that in general the structure is the right one. So I don't think that it really is helpful to establish a general idea of, we're not going to allow technologies which violate the natural or, whatever kind of line you want to draw in the sand. Those lines are very difficult to determine in actual public policy, and it's a lot simpler for me just to say, well, people do what they want unless you can prove it's harmful.
Father Ted, on the same basic question, I know that, and I don't know that I have the wisdom to be able to differentiate, but I always personally think that cloning, for example, or some kinds of genetic manipulation should be the purview of God. It's not for me to know the potential ramifications. Are there areas, you have both sides of this issue, are there areas that we simply should never go with our technology, with our technological expertise, in terms of biotechnology?
Yes, I would say that there certainly are. I think that the very function of ethics is to acknowledge and recognize that there may be some things that men should never do. And that, in a sense, is a necessity, because the good things that we end up doing really can be made complete only by the things that we refuse to do. We have to draw real ethical lines. And I think, a very basic kind of starting point here is would be, a postulate like we should not ever directly take the life of an innocent human being. It's a fairly simple kind of statement, and it will require, a little bit of explanation for certain complicated circumstances, but it's one of these universals that will give us a kind of ethical guideline to be able to navigate into biotechnology and appropriate the powers of that technology in a responsible way. So those kinds of, approaches I think are essential in our day and age. Science must be constrained by solid ethics. Otherwise there will always be some kind of driving force to move forward, but it may not be one that respects the humanity and dignity of the human being.
And, of course, no rule is ever as simple as the rule maker thinks, because in the example you gave, the question would be, who's innocent? And the person who would want to violate somebody would make the argument that whomever is not necessarily innocent. But I think it's a good starting point. Professor Somerville, how do we determine what technologies should not be pursued? How do we establish any kind of an ethical standard against which to measure the benefits of technology and whether or not we should go there or not?
Well, I believe that people have got a right to come into being naturally, and they've got a right not to be designed by others, that they come into being with their own natural creation. And it's after that if something's wrong, that we can sort of change the way that people are, trying to help them to not be harmed when we can help them. But at the beginning, I think it's wrong to interfere, to design those people so that they will have certain characteristics that we've chosen to give them, and they haven't had a natural creation.
Now, but how far then do you take that? For example, I don't know, just as an example, stem cell, which is, big stuff these days. Now, technically speaking, okay, if you just leave me alone, I live my life, I live and I die. But then when you take the stem cell to fix something wrong with me, is that unnatural? It's my stem cell. How do you unblur those kinds of distinctions so that you can establish a formula for what we do and do not pursue?
Well, I don't know how to answer that because I'm not sure what you mean by a stem cell there. Do you mean that you're going to change the embryo, or what do you mean?
Okay, it might actually be a bad example because I'm not a scientist. But what I'm trying to say is that if I take something that is not a part of me initially and use it to augment me.
Well, I think it depends when you're doing that, whether you're doing it in creating you so that you're changing what you will be once you come into existence, or whether you've come into existence and at some point, because let's say there's some awful disease that we might be able to fix and help you, then I think that's acceptable. But I think bringing you into being by sort of artificially creating you, I think you should be brought into being naturally.
Our topic is biotechnology. Our guests are Professor Margaret Somerville, Dr. James Hughes, and Father Tad Pacholczyk. Don't forget to check out the Global Freedom Report on Facebook, by the way. Go to globalfreedomreport.com and click on the Facebook icon. It's all over the site. We have a discussion on biotechnology that is up there on our Facebook page. We'd love for you to participate in it. Global Freedom Report at Facebook. From the chat room, Lovely comments, I agree that genetic manipulation prior to birth to manipulate the outcome is morally wrong. Who knows what life lessons are to be learned by what some call a fluke of nature. So thank you for that, Lovely. If you have a comment you'd like to make, www.globalfreedomreport.com or 888-747-1968. Let's get back to our panelists. Father Tad, I want to start with you on this question. What about the potential unanticipated ramifications of work in biotechnology? In Stephen King's The Stand, an experiment in bioengineering went very wrong. It resulted in a plague that wiped out all but a very few people. Are we really so certain that our work in this field will not result in some kind of catastrophe of major proportions? Is it worth the risk?